And now on the line is Steve Bradley, Chair of the Rail Lobby Group Into the West. Steve, welcome back to the RFM.
Thanks, Darren.
Steve, today is our first interview in nearly 4 months, and I got in touch with you today to talk mainly about one county in Ireland that so far has been left out of the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review. Leading us up to talk about that county, Steve, and bearing in mind that our last interview was nearly 4 months ago, can you tell me if there's any news on whether the governments in Ireland and the UK are going to accept and start implementing the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review?
So I guess to recap for your listeners, the All Ireland Rail Review is a joint North-South initiative. It's to plan for the next 20 to 30 years the future of rail on the island on a cross-border basis, both for passengers and for freight. There's a recognition behind all of this that public transport isn't good on either side of the border and that it needs to be improved. And this review was to look at what the options are and to make recommendations. So it made a series of recommendations, or it has made a series, which were released in draft form in the summer of 2023. And there was an opportunity for people to feedback in the autumn and say, what they weren't happy with. What we're told is that the final version of the report is due out in the spring. But this is where I guess your question comes in. At the moment, there's no minister in charge of infrastructure in the north. And if there's no minister to sign it off, north and south, then there's a question mark over whether it will be released to that timescale. And if we end up with a situation where Stormont doesn't come back, and it seems to change on a week-by-week basis whether it will come back or whether it won't, but if it doesn't come back, then they'll have to come up with some other solution. Because usually, for something like this, a government strategy, normally you need a politician. They write the appropriate politician to sign it off, and what you do if there isn't one. So that's the kind of the context. And then following on from that is the issue about it's great for the Republic in the south. You guys have a government, you have a transport minister, and we're already starting to see funding decisions being made relating to the All Ireland Rail strategy. There's line clearance that's been happening on the Western Rail Corridor to link up basically the sections between Athenry and Claremorris. That's been cleared at the moment. There was talk in the media just yesterday of Limerick getting an additional station and of having some track duals. So the Republic is pushing ahead with some of the stuff that's in the All Ireland Rail Review. In the north, because we have no government and we have no minister, so there's nobody there to make decisions, there's nobody there to allocate funding. There's been no progress really of note. A couple of small things have been funded by London, but at the moment there's no progress in the north. So we've got the strategy. It's almost finished. It needs some things improved. But unless we have a government in the north, we can't push ahead with the entire, the all-island entirety of the things it's recommending.
Okay, that's kind of the big picture, I know, Steve, as regards this story. One county in Ireland is being left out so far more than others. Can you tell me more about this, Steve?
Yeah, this is something we were very disappointed in. At the moment, there are 5 counties on the island that don't have rail, and they're all in Ulster. It's Tyrone and Fermanagh in the north, Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan in the south. If everything that's proposed in the All Ireland Rail Review does happen, then rail will be restored to 4 of those counties. So Donegal, Tyrone, Monaghan and Cavan will get the rail back. And that means just one county on the island, and actually there's no counties in Britain that don't have rail either. So the entire northwest corner of Europe would have just one county without rail, and that would be Fermanagh. We just don't understand how anybody could publish a report saying just one county should not have a basic level of infrastructure. There's a strong argument for Enniskillen to have rail. Enniskillen's a town of 14,000 people. It's very much a county town, but also serves an important role for the north of Leitrim, for the south of Donegal, and for bits of Sligo. It's very much kind of like that regional town. And it has a lot of industry there. It's one of the largest producers of glass bottles In Europe, for example, there's a lot of wood products, a lot of heavy stuff which is ideal for moving around by rail is produced and is processed in the county. So we think there's a solid case for rail to be there. A different proposal by the London government, something that was called the Union Connectivity Review, it specifically highlighted Enniskillen as having an important tourism industry and said that the fact it doesn't have rail is a negative thing. And that's been a problem with the All Islands rail strategy, is they haven't looked at tourism at all. So when it comes to counties like Fermanagh, like Donegal, but also, Kerry and Mayo and Galway, if you're not including the demand from tourism in terms of passenger numbers, then you really are only looking at part of the picture. So we think it doesn't make sense to leave just one county without rail. We think it's just terrible optics. It just looks bad. And we suspect, again, it's the absence of government in the north meant that the civil service in Northern Ireland are very Belfast focused. They wouldn't have blinked twice at the idea of Fermanagh being left without rail, and there's been no politician in there to say the right thing and say, look, you can't just leave one county on its own. So that's where we are at the moment. In the draft proposal is to leave one county in this entire corner of northwest Europe without any rail. We've pushed back against that, as have others. So when the final version of the strategy comes out, we'll see if it still proposes leaving Fermanagh without rail. But we've just written to the leaders of the political parties in Northern Ireland and said to them, if Stormont comes back, and if your party has the infrastructure minister, you must refuse to sign off any rail strategy that doesn't include Fermanagh.
Okay, and there is news this week I saw a couple of days ago, Steve, where it was reported that if action is not taken ASAP, then Fermanagh may never have a railway line. Is that true?
Yes, so there's a proposal to build some housing in the centre of Fermanagh. Your listeners may not be familiar with Fermanagh. Fermanagh has a greenway which goes right into the town centre, and it's the old railway line. And that greenway is pretty intact right into town. When it comes to having a train station in an urban environment, you want to have it as close to the centre as you can for obvious reasons. If you have it too far out of town, then it becomes less usable, less desirable. A good example is Newry. Newry's train station is 2 miles outside of the city centre, and Newry's not even a very big place. It's actually a station in what used to be a place called Besbrook, so it was never actually in Newry. So at the moment you get a train to Newry, you end up 2 miles away from the city centre, and you have to wait for a shuttle bus to bring you in. That's not ideal. People, who want to go into the centre of a town for shopping, for work, for whatever reason, don't want to be stranded 2 miles out and have to wait for a shuttle bus to arrive. So if the proposed new housing at the end of this greenway in Enniskillen happens, it will basically stop that greenway route, that old railway route, right into the centre of Enniskillen being available for rail. And that means you'd have to do for Enniskillen what has happened for Newry. You'd have to have a new train station on the edge of the town. And again, it means Enniskillen would get rail back. But I mean, realistically, if your listeners think about where they live, if there wasn't rail convenient to them, if they're in a town and they have to go to the edge of town or 2 miles out to access rail, would they be bothered? I'd say a certain number of people wouldn't. So it's not, rail would still come back to Enniskillen, but it would be in the wrong place.
Okay, yeah, that'd be terrible if that happens. Hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully the party leaders will get back to the letter you sent off recently. Okay, Steve, as you said, currently Fermanagh is not the only county in Ireland without a railway line. I think you said there are 5 counties. Am I right in saying, Steve, that it is by no means a foregone conclusion that there will be an extension of the railway line in Northern Ireland and in Donegal anytime soon?
The infrastructure, the timelines are very long, so I don't think we'll see much of anything happening soon. The shortest term project that will happen will probably be Armagh to Portadown to Armagh, and then that's the route which it's proposed would then continue on to Mullingar through Cavan and Monaghan. So that's the route that eventually would restore rail to those counties. The Portadown Armagh section is clear. It could be, they could effectively go in tomorrow and start working on it. It's only 10 miles. So that will probably be the first reopening. But even that could be within 10 years. It probably would be certainly no quicker than 5 years. And for the other track routes, the long ones like Derry Portadown, which would connect the northwest to Dublin and some of the other routes. We're talking decades. I mean, unfortunately, it is very slow. We're not fast in this part of the world anyway, as we've seen with Metrolink in Dublin. We don't move very fast in terms of infrastructure, but it's complicated on these long routes where you have to acquire the land and everything else. So for your listeners, anybody who thinks we're going to see, the rail map transformed by the end of this decade, it's almost certainly not going to happen. I think the 2030s is where it starts to get interesting. That's where there should be delivery of certainly some of this stuff. And by the 2040s, if we're not looking at a railway map of the island of Ireland that looks significantly different by the 2040s, then I think something will have gone wrong. And then there's the broader question about, the All Ireland Rail Review says where should get rail. It's also said where shouldn't. Mentioned that Fermanagh isn't getting any rail at all currently, but Donegal's only proposed to get rail as far as Letterkenny. Letterkenny's in the very northeast corner of Donegal. It's only about 25 kilometres from Derry City, so it's very near the border. The proposal is to leave the rest of Donegal, so almost all of the land mass of Donegal County, without any rail. So it would be great for Letterkenny. It's the fastest growing town in the county. It'd be great for it to have rail, but we think it's wrong to leave almost all of Donegal without rail. So that's something else that will have to be challenged, and that's probably quite a few decades away. Our proposal is, once you extend the Western Rail Corridor, which currently connects Limerick to Galway, once you bring that all the way up to Sligo, it should then continue on through Donegal, like an old route used to do, up as far as Letterkenny and onto Derry. And that would connect all the population centres on the western part of the island together, from Derry through Letterkenny, Sligo, Galway, Limerick, down to Cork. And that would start to act as a connected counterbalance to the dominance of Dublin and Belfast in the east, because the west really needs something like that to be able to stand on its own feet economically and population-wise. But again, even for that sort of stuff, which the rail strategy currently doesn't approve, we are talking, 2050, 2050s. So unfortunately, big time scales, but, all we can do is anybody who's interested in seeing it happen, speak to your TVs, your councillors, any elected representatives, your MEPs, tell them you want rail, more rail in your area, more rail across the island. It will take time, but the sooner we start, then the sooner these things can be delivered.
Okay, Steve, just have one more question. You've after going into a lot of detail there, but you're very informative. Just I know, even when the decision is made to build the railway, it takes several years to actually build it. But I was under the impression that there's a very good chance, and that Eamon Ryan, and I believe he said this as well, maybe I'm wrong, but there is a good chance that there will be a railway between Letterkenny and Derry, a decision made on that, in the short or medium term, rather. Is that likely, do you think?
There's no reason why we couldn't have a decision like that. The problem at the moment is the All-Ireland strategy, the sequencing it recommends. So it recommends that you reopen Derry to Portadown first, and then you connect from Derry onto Letterkenny, and then that would give you your rail routes from Donegal in the northwest right down to Dublin. As I said, the problem is the All-Ireland Rail Strategy recommends, or its proposed sequencing is to do Derry Portadown first, which is probably 15 years or more away. You could do Derry Letterkenny very easily. It's only, as I mentioned, it's only about 20 odd miles, so what's that, 30 odd kilometres. Most of that is south of the border. Most of it is in the Republic. We know that the government, the Oireachtas, has quite a large chunk of money in terms of the corporation tax. Revenues have to have. There's a lot of surplus in there. It's not a great distance of rail. It could be delivered for a few hundreds of million, but we're not talking billions by any chance. So it's relatively small money. And we're keen to see that happen. We're keen to see Derry Letterkenny happen, regardless of how long it takes for Derry Portadown. There's a strong case for Letterkenny to be on the rail network full stop. There's a strong case for it to be connected up to Derry, because the two towns form the northwest city region and are increasingly working together politically and economically and population-wise. So they should be linked up regardless of whether, when the timing is for you can get a train between Letterkenny and Dublin. So hopefully that can happen sooner. No reason why it couldn't be delivered within a decade. It's something that we're keen to see happens. We'll be pushing Eamon Ryan on, and we'll be working with the councils to ensure that hopefully happens as well.